the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Mesopotamian history. I originally said it's kind of like a linear look at the history of Mesopotamia, but I really don't even like the word linear because it's kind of got a bad rap now. Because when it comes to all of this, we're talking about the evolution, the devolution of consciousness, the cycles of time, and the fact that we've been, I believe, at much, if not equally or much more of an advanced level of consciousness in our past, and maybe even technologically. So when we say things linearly, it doesn't really do it justice. But what I'm going to do here is give you kind of like a journey through ancient Mesopotamia. I think we're going to go back to around 7,000 BC, plus or minus, right? And also tie that into the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the reason why, and you can see Gilgamesh in the back here having a battle with his counterpart Enkidu. But the reason why I wanted to do this presentation was because of my story of how I woke up. When I got into all this awareness in 2001, I was 19 years old. And what I was doing is I was looking for the root of all religion, right? I had been raised in Hinduism, but I never really truly believed what I was being told, right? I just did what I was told to do. I followed the rites and rituals, just like a good Indian kid. And then when I graduated, went to college, I had the opportunity to, I started writing a lot of poetry, spoken word, freestyle rapping, and a lot of my poems and raps were about the universe, cosmos, things like that. I started looking into what I was writing about, and I was looking to expand my vocabulary in regards to like quantum physics and spirituality, not spirituality even, but quantum physics and black holes and extraterrestrial sci-fi info. And as I was doing that and I was looking on the internet, I found a lot of information that really eventually brought me to the Sumerian scriptures. In 2002, I remember like for 2002, 3, and 4, I was at Panera Bread with like the Quran, the printouts of translations of the Sumerian tablets of creation and the Bible and the Old Testament. And I would be highlighting similarities between them all, because one of the first things that I discovered was the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh versus the story of Noah. And there was a lot of similarities in here. I wanted to find the root of all religion. That was my thought. What is the root of all religion? Is there an original source code, if you will, where many different cultures have pulled from? And as I started finding that, as I started thinking about that and researching it, I started realizing that the Sumerian scriptures, right, and there's many other cultures that have shared information across the world, but at this point, I was into the Sumerian text, the Mesopotamian text, let's say, because there were multiple, civilizations within Mesopotamia that had this awareness and information that was passed down. I started seeing that there were a few stories in here that seemed to have been taken and borrowed from religions and civilizations all over the world. So the first thing that came to me was, well, if we can see and track back that these stories come from older civilizations, and then these older civilizations believed in multiple gods, but now we can even see that these monotheistic religions, right? Let's just name a few: Islam, Christianity, Judaism. These monotheistic religions have actually pulled from religions that are polytheistic, that they believe are pagan and even like Luciferian in some aspects of fundamental religious people, but their stories literally come from them. So why do we concentrate on saying my way is the only way, this is the only way, when we can prove right here that we have all these similarities and connections? Why don't we focus on what connects us, right? This was the first root of all religion. And why don't we focus on what connects us? Why do we focus on what separates us? That was the original awareness that led me to eventually creating Portal to Ascension. So there seemed to be an advanced awareness of science as well in these scriptures and the universe, and speaking about the universe, in the solar system. So there was some sort of advanced like quantum physics awareness, it seemed, that was in these ancient scriptures. And it started making me wonder, like, wait a second, they are basically speaking about things that in metaphorical ways, so a lot of times through metaphors, that we're only now discovering over the last like 100 years. So this took me to exploring quantum physics and the exploration of vibration and frequency. And through that, I started going back to the Hindu text and realizing, whoa, this is all about vibration and frequency. When it comes to meditation, yoga, Ayurvedic health, all of this is about vibration. And the Anunnaki story also started my process of connecting this source material to many ancient civilizations. For example, we have already mentioned the Epic of Gilgamesh connects to the Noah story, right? And we're going to get into that. But then the Moses story, right? The Moses story comes from a 7th century BC Neo-Assyrian text about King Sargon of Akkad. And Sargon was the illegitimate son of a high priestess and was put in a basket and sent drifting down a river, right? Another story from Neo-Assyrian that actually came back from even later, even earlier text, because as we will see soon, that the Assyrian Empire had a huge library of 30,000 clay tablets. That was the recorded history of Mesopotamia. Many of them were ancient tablets. Some of them were created then about stories that took place in Mesopotamia thousands of years earlier. So those are just two of the stories. There were a few others that started making me realize this. And I just got to throw the names out there for two people that really was instrumental in my awakening. And amazingly enough, I've had the opportunity to work with them both. And William Henry more than Jack Jordan Maxwell. But William Henry and Jordan Maxwell was like my introduction to a lot of this awareness. And then coming across the information on the sons of God and the daughters of men, and how that, see, that's the third story right there. Sons of God, daughter of men, fallen angels. And we have a whole slide on that in a second, but how that connects to the story of the Sumerian scriptures, stories within it. So let's firstly talk about the discovery of the Epic of Gilgamesh. We're going to go closer to present time before we go far back into the ancient past. In the mid 7th century BC, right? North Mesopotamia became the most thriving civilization the world has seen. Empire expanded all the way to Egypt, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, right? And as I just showed you in the earlier slide. And this image isn't 700 BC, but it's 1200 BC, because I want to show you the beginning of the Assyrian Empire, right? And you can see the Assyrian Empire right there, Mesopotamia, North Mesopotamia. We have the Elamites at the bottom, right? And then we have the Kassites, we have the Hittites at the top right there. And then, you go to the west and you start going towards Egypt and Jerusalem, and you go to the east and you have the Proto-Indo-European tribes, right? And then as time progressed, the Assyrian Empire expanded from that time up until around 700, which is around 500 years. And you can see here, this Assyrian Empire, as stated, extended all the way to Kemet, Egypt, and all the way to the Persian area closer to the Caspian Sea. And at the bottom here, if you take a look, it'll show you what areas were the Assyrian Empire at certain times. So 1800 to 1600 BC, we have that little small area right there. It's like a few city-states. And then a few hundred years later, we have a bigger area. And then 500 years later, this whole entire area that's covered by the light green. In the Assyrian Empire, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, there was a great library that included 30,000 clay tablets that attracted scholars from around the world to explore and research. The Royal Library of Ashurbanipal, named after Ashurbanipal, the great king of the Assyrian Empire. And here are some tablets, as we can see. And here's like on the left right here, it's just a bunch of tablets that were found in this little cavern. The tablets had the history of Mesopotamia for thousands of years. And in these tablets, there was a story of a king named Gilgamesh was on one of the tablets. Gilgamesh's quest had him confronting monsters and gods and even immortals. The end of the 7th century, the dynasty was extinct, and the tablets were lost to time for 2 millennia, 2,000 years, until they were found. And here is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was one of the tablets. So now we're going to go back further. Let's go back to the 3rd millennium BC. But before we do that, let's just talk real briefly about the 4th millennium BC, which is 1,000 years before that. In the 4th millennium BC, we begin to see city-states pop up and flourish. And the largest was the mega site of Uruk that had a big cultural influence on the surrounding areas. See in this map here, we have Uruk right down there. And then the spread of Uruk from that point, and you can see that whole entire area right there around the 3rd century BC had a cultural influence connected to the city-state of Uruk. Uruk revolved around hierarchies of temple districts, each one of them for a different deity. Districts were distribution centers to give out fixed rations to the citizens. Proto-cuneiform emerged during this time, signs on clay tablets found in Uruk throughout the Middle East. And here is a proto-cuneiform tablet, and you can see, how the writing actually began during that time. On the proto-cuneiform writings, we find evidence of things like receipts of goods such as grains, products, and textiles. Uruk's system continued until around 3100 BC when it began collapsing. Possibly some of the theories of why it collapsed was possibly due to change in climate and the ability to have certain tradable goods. But then we see the abandonment of cuneiform writing and the resurgence of ancient pottery styles coming back in that area. But just a city-state to the north of Uruk started flourishing during this time. The city-state was called Jedmet Nasser. It was a region that maintained the cuneiform writing, and they kept evolving it. So we see the surrounding areas, including Uruk, going back to an earlier type of pottery style and writing, but we see Jedmet Nasser being this place that all of the stuff that had already been created started evolving and flourishing. A common religious system was put in place with the center being Uruk as Jedmet Nasser expanded. This was from around 3100 BC to 2900 BC, which is only 200 years, okay? So some people believe that if you look up Jedmet Nasser and try to find maps on the internet, there's very, very little information about it. And the reason why is a lot of scholars and archaeologists don't even really consider this time to be its own archaeological period just because of how short it was. But technically, it was an actual independently thriving city-state that occurred during the fall of Uruk, or the collapsing of society within Uruk. So clay tablets were found there in Jedmet Nasser, dedicated to the goddess Inanna. So we see a really huge concentration to Inanna, who then obviously became known as Ishtar, the deity that probably a lot of you are familiar with. And then we go a little forward after Jedmet Nasser, moving forward in time here. And we see the beginning of a civilization called the Sumerians. And this is around 2900 BC to 2350 BC, the Sumerians in the third millennia, early dynastic Sumer. And we see here, we have urban areas being built. We see the city-states of Uruk, Ur, Umma, and Kish. And there's all of a sudden this competition that did not really exist in that area before. There was a competition for growth. There was a competition for getting more land. They all had agricultural lands across the Tigris River that expanded about 10 to 15 kilometers in each direction, because obviously Tigris River was feeding the local area, land will be flourishing. So they would all up the Tigris River, and they would all have their own areas that was around 10 to 15 kilometers in each direction thick, that they would cultivate the land and do their agriculture in. And then there would be desert areas in between them, and then it would be the next city states and their agricultural land. And here is just a little map of those city-states. You can see Kish at the top here, Umma, Lagash, Uruk, along the riverbeds. Each city-state was a dwelling place for gods and goddesses, and the deities began being given human-like traits. So this is when we start seeing that these deities that had been part of the culture in that area, Mesopotamia, even before Sumer, started being given different types of traits that were taking on human traits. And this was at the same time as there was an increase in military building, right? There was an increase in competition, and the relationships between these city-states became complex, much more complex than they had been in the past, because of the dealings with trade, competition, and whatever human traits that really came with that, which goes hand in hand with these individuals starting to give these human-like traits to these deities. The picture qualities of proto-cuneiform script became more symbolic and finally into Sumerian language during this time. The names of kings began being inscribed. So we also see this claiming, right? Like almost like the beginning of the claiming of land. Like, I own this, I created this. We see names of kings being inscribed that dated back beyond the Sumerian Empire into past empires that existed in Mesopotamia. So you can see here the cuneiform Sumerian writings. So now that I've given you kind of like just a picture of Mesopotamia there, and we're going to still talk about different cultural things that occurred and what happened a little later as we talk about the story of Gilgamesh, let's get into what this presentation is truly about. Gilgamesh. First question is, who was Gilgamesh? Well, he was the ruler of Uruk, son of a mortal king, Lugabanda, and the goddess of Ninsan. He possessed superhuman size and strength, possibly a giant. He was known in his early days, at least, to be lustful and took advantage of women. The gods then created Enkidu, which was like a hybrid beast kind of person. You can see here, Enkidu is on the left with the horns. The gods created Enkidu to confront Gilgamesh because Gilgamesh was running wild and doing all types of things that they didn't approve on. So he was presented, and originally in some of these scriptures, including the King's List, he was presented as a member of the first dynasty of Uruk, and his father was actually spoken of being a phantom or a spirit rather than an actual human. It was more like an energy. Enkidu is discovered. So Enkidu was created by the gods to combat Gilgamesh. Enkidu was in the wild and was discovered by a hunter and civilized by having intercourse with a temple prostitute named Shamhat. He then adopts human dress and manners because of his mating with Shahmat, and goes to confront Gilgamesh, and they wrestle. They stop fighting and they end up becoming best friends, right? So after battling each other, wrestling each other, it ends up stopping. Eventually they become really good friends. Gilgamesh says Enkidu. Later in text, we see Gilgamesh saying Enkidu is the axe by his side. And he was known to love Enkidu as he would his own wife. Gilgamesh then goes to the cedar forest to slay a monster. When they're on their way back to Uruk, Ishtar, the goddess of love, wants to marry him, but Gilgamesh says no, he's not down for that. She forces Anu, the sky god, to unleash the bull of heaven, creating devastation on earth. So Gilgamesh, his exploits took him all around the known world at that time, all the way to the Persian Empire that came later, all the way to the cedar forest. And this is the cedar forest that is speculated that he actually went to, which is in current day Lebanon. And here's the cedar forest in Lebanon. So she forces Anu to unleash the bull of heaven, which created devastation on earth and havoc for Gilgamesh's people. So Enkidu, his most trusted confidant, friend, wife, came a partner, let's say. Enkidu beat the bull, and the gods convene and decide that he must die for slaying the bull. Right? They did not appreciate the fact that he killed the bull that they had created and sent down to earth. So Gilgamesh had such a huge grief about this that he stays with Enkidu for 6 days and 7 nights until a maggot drops from his nose. And then he goes pretty much crazy. He tears out his own hair. He clothes himself in skin of wild animals and creates a statue in Enkidu's name. And then he heads off, leaves his kingdom. He goes on a quest to Mount Mashu at the ends of the earth and enters a tunnel in which he goes into a fertile land called the Garden of the Gods. Tunnel, I like to say, it goes through a portal where he goes into this otherworldly land called the Garden of the Gods. He there, before he can fully enter the tunnel, sees a group of lions, and he kills them all, right, with his superhuman strength and his giant-like size, and he clothes themselves in his skin. He destroys the stone ones, right, the group of beings, and goes across the waters of death to Utnapishtim with a boatman. He was instructed to cut down first. Before he could actually get to Utnapishtim, he had to cut down 120 trees and form them into poles to cross the waters of death. And after he did that, he jumps in with a boatman, as you can see in this tablet below right here, and heads towards meeting this individual named Utnapishtim. When they arrive to where Utnapishtim and his wife live, Gilgamesh resonates with him because he felt that they're very similar and asks him how he received immortality. Utnapishtim tells him of a flood sent by the gods to drown mankind. He had survived the floods, and Enlil granted him immortality. Utnapishtim says, if you can stay awake for 7 days and nights, you will get immortality. Gilgamesh tried it, but he couldn't do it. He fell asleep and he did not make it. So Utnapishtim said, I'll give you another chance. If you find a special plant in the ocean that will rejuvenate anyone, you can become immortal. So he does this, he retrieves it, but then a serpent steals it and he doesn't get immortality. A serpent steals it overnight while he's sleeping and he can't receive immortality. So he goes home, and in response to his experience there, he goes back and becomes the king again, and he builds a great wall of Uruk that we have discovered will definitely exist because it's actually been uncovered through archaeological digs. So the story is of all ancient scriptures really in Mesopotamia area that the Great Wall of Uruk that has been uncovered in many places, not the whole thing, was actually built by Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was shown how the underworld looks, and he told that when he dies, he's going to be the judge of death in his future role. That when he dies, he's going to go to the netherworld, the underworld, and he's going to be the judge of death. And here is just an imagery of the boatman taking Gilgamesh to Utnapishtim. Oh no, this is actually, excuse me, this is actually the boatman, and this is Gilgamesh here cutting down 120 trees in order to cross the waters of death. So the question really is this mythology or is this based on any reality? So let's go ahead and search for the real Gilgamesh through scholarly research, archaeological studies, and so on. He was believed to be, there was actually believed to be a monarch with his name that did exist that, through archaeological evidence and some tablets and scriptures seem that this person existed around 2800 BC. But it's not really believed to be the original Gilgamesh. Like Gilgamesh, his name had been used for thousands of years before that, even before writing even came across. There's evidence that Gilgamesh and the stories of Enkidu and Gilgamesh was spoke about for thousands of years, maybe even dating back 7000 BC, in which a pottery was found around that time that looks like a man wearing a lion's skin with Enkidu, the beast man. So it's believed that maybe this king decided just to take on the name because of the stories. So this whole thing, though, it has to be noted that most scholars think that the whole story of Gilgamesh is entirely mythological, right? Uruk and the Iana temple district and Kulab have been extensively excavated and has not come up with any archaeological evidence of his existence. So they've, all those areas that he was supposedly at, that he was the ruler of the first dynasty, they've excavated much of the area, right? And this has to be said with a grain of salt because who's doing the excavations? Is anything really being found? Do they not want us to know? All of those are questions for sure, but I'm just giving you things based on my research here. So technically, it's been said that no hardcore evidence of his existence has been found, except for stories and poems of him. A story of before Mesopotamia. So my question here at the bottom is, and you'll see as I'm progressing in this presentation, is that could this be a story that did happen, but what occurred is that the people of Mesopotamia started using their local surroundings, their own city-states, their own cultural awareness at that time, and place this individual that existed before Mesopotamia in the constructs of what they had, what their civilization looked like. And I'm leaning towards that's probably is the case, especially if we're talking about the flood story and this dating back maybe thousands of years before, the Sumerians even came onto the scene. So in the Iana district in the third millennium BC, there's a large temple there dedicated to Inanna. And there was an invasion that occurred there around 24th to 23rd century BC, and all the structures in the area could have been destroyed. So there was an invasion that happened there, and it's pretty much accepted that all the structures probably were there. So maybe those were destroyed and those had evidence of Gilgamesh. That's one of the possibilities. And the Great Wall of Uruk, which is 9 kilometers, 500 hectares, 9 meters thick, not too much of this wall has been excavated, and there are no inscriptions on the wall to show who built it. And at that time, many kings would inscribe themselves on what they would create. And a lot of times on the bottom of things, even like they would inscribe it because they wanted people to know. So the story of Gilgamesh says that he was the one that built the wall, but we have no inscriptions to even say if that is the case at all, and cannot find archaeological evidence of date. Most other Sumerian kings inscribed the things they created, and this is around 4500 BC we're talking about. So here we see the possibility of an older story being brought into more of a modern day Mesopotamia, modern day meaning 4500 BC, in which they could have actually given him credit for creating a wall that he maybe didn't because he existed thousands of years before, just through the stories that started being cultivated about him. So there looks like there could be a mixture of some truth of who this individual was and that a really ancient story, because as I said, we see evidence of him on pottery around 6,000 to 7,000 BC, but the wall, we don't even see that really coming about until 4,500 BC, which is around 2,500 years later. So what is really going on here, and why does it say in these scriptures, in these tablets, that he created the wall? And as you're going to see soon, is the story of Gilgamesh took on many different evolutions, and things were added to it, things were taken from it, periods of time where only certain aspects were discussed, and then resurrections of ancient information came about. So much happened that it's not really possible to find out the right answer, the real answer. It's only possible to explore all the things that we're uncovering.